If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far this journey reaches. Your voice matters here, and every comment helps build a community of story lovers. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Tomorrow, a brand new story awaits. One filled with hope, surprises, and maybe even a little magic. We can't wait to share it with you. See you then. Charles Bennett had everything a man could dream of. A sprawling 10,000 square foot mansion outside Chicago, a fleet of luxury cars, and a business empire worth millions. Yet none of it mattered anymore. Not since the accident. Not since his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, had lost the use of her legs. 2 years ago, a reckless driver had changed their lives forever, leaving Lily bound to a wheelchair and Charles bound to a heartbreak that no amount of money could fix. He had flown her to the top hospitals across the country, from New York to Los Angeles. World-renowned neurologists, surgeons, even holistic healers who promised miracles, he had paid them all. Some charged tens of thousands of dollars for a single consultation, yet every diagnosis was the same: permanent spinal damage, no chance of recovery. Over time, hope became a cruel word, and every doctor's appointment felt like another funeral for the life they once had. One chilly autumn afternoon, Charles pushed Lily's wheelchair along the cracked sidewalks near downtown Chicago. It wasn't a place he normally visited, but Lily had asked to see something other than white hospital walls and marble floors. The city smelled of rain and old iron. Traffic buzzed in the distance. Lily sat silently, her small hands tucked under a fuzzy pink blanket. Her blonde hair fluttered in the wind, her blue eyes staring down at the worn pavement. Charles barely noticed the boy at first, a skinny figure huddled in the shadows between two buildings, his bare feet standing out starkly against the cold concrete. But then the boy spoke, his voice steady and clear. "Sir, I know how to help her walk again," he said. Charles froze. His first instinct was anger, followed closely by suspicion. He gripped the wheelchair handle tighter. Was this a scam? Was someone watching, waiting to take advantage of his vulnerability? He turned sharply to face the boy. The child couldn't have been older than Lily. Maybe 10, maybe 11 at most. His skin was dark and bruised in places. He wore an oversized army jacket that nearly swallowed him whole. Dirt clung to his hands, and his cheeks were hollow. But his eyes held something Charles hadn't seen in months. Hope. Not the polished hope sold by doctors, but a raw, stubborn kind that refused to die. Charles lowered his voice. "What did you just say?" The boy stepped forward slightly, hands in his jacket pockets. "I said, I can help her. My name's Mason. I live behind the old train station. I've seen you here before. I knew you'd come back." Charles stiffened. "You've been watching us?" "Not in a creepy way," Mason said quickly. "It's just, I saw her. She looked like she used to run, like she used to fly. But her legs forgot how." For a moment, Charles said nothing. He wanted to walk away, to dismiss the boy with a wave of his hand, but then he glanced down at Lily. For the first time in days, her head had lifted. Her eyes were locked on Mason, wide with something fragile and fierce, something that looked a lot like belief. And just like that, Charles found himself hesitating. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. Charles stood frozen, one hand tightening around the wheelchair's handle. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to walk away from this filthy alley and the barefoot boy making promises he couldn't possibly keep. Yet something in Lily's face held him there, a flicker of hope, so faint yet so powerful that had overpowered every doubt, clawing at his chest. Mason didn't wait for permission. He simply turned and motioned for them to follow. Charles hesitated for a heartbeat longer, then sighed, muttered a prayer under his breath, and pushed Lily's chair forward. The city quickly faded behind them. They crossed 2 empty parking lots and cut through an abandoned playground, where the swings creaked on their chains, swaying in the cold breeze. Mason moved fast, barefoot on cracked pavement, weaving through broken fences and piles of litter, as if he had traveled this path 1,000 times before. "Where exactly are you taking us?" Charles called out, his voice edged with tension. "To someone who can help her," Mason replied without turning around. "Someone real." Charles clenched his jaw but kept pushing. Every bump in the sidewalk made Lily wince, and twice he almost stopped. But every time he looked down at her, she was leaning forward slightly in her seat, her eyes fixed on Mason with a focus he hadn't seen in months. They passed under an old railway bridge, graffiti sprawling across every inch of brick. The air smelled of rust and damp earth. Mason hopped over a puddle and led them into a narrow dirt trail cutting through a patch of woods. Charles glanced back. Chicago's skyline was already shrinking behind them, swallowed by gray mist. "This is insane," Charles muttered. He was a billionaire. He wasn't supposed to be following strange kids into the wilderness. But still, he pushed forward, the wheelchair bumping and jolting over roots and stones. After what felt like a mile, the woods opened up to reveal a small clearing. In the center stood a crooked cabin, its wood faded gray with age, moss crawling up the sides. Smoke drifted lazily from a stone chimney. It looked like something torn straight from a fairy tale or a nightmare. Mason stopped at the edge of the clearing and turned to face them, breathing hard. "She's inside," he said quietly. "Her name's Miss Harper. She doesn't take money, only trust." Charles shifted uneasily, his instincts at war. He crouched down next to Lily's wheelchair, looking her straight in the eyes. "If anything feels wrong," he said, his voice low and steady, "we leave. No questions asked." Lily nodded, her small hand squeezing his wrist. Taking a deep breath, Charles rose to his feet. Together, they crossed the clearing, the cabin looming larger with every step. As they approached the porch, the door creaked open, and standing there, waiting, was an old woman with silver hair braided with twigs and thread, her green eyes sharp and timeless. Without a word, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of salesmanship or deceit. It was something older, deeper. Something that made Charles's heart stutter for reasons he couldn't explain. Maybe, just maybe, this was not the end of their journey, but the beginning. Charles kept one hand firmly on the wheelchair handle as the door swung open wider. The old woman stepped onto the porch, her bare feet making no sound against the weathered boards. Up close, she looked even stranger. Her silver hair was woven with tiny feathers and strands of dried herbs, and she wore a faded patchwork dress that looked handmade. Yet it wasn't her appearance that froze Charles in place. It was her eyes. They were piercing, ancient, and impossibly kind all at once. "You brought her," the woman said, her voice soft but clear as a bell. Mason nodded silently, stepping back. Charles opened his mouth to speak, to demand answers, to ask what exactly she planned to do. But before he could, she was kneeling gently in front of Lily's wheelchair. "May I touch your knees, child?" she asked. Lily hesitated, glancing up at her father. Charles's gut twisted, but he saw the hope flickering again in Lily's face, the same fragile hope that had led them here. Slowly, he nodded. The woman's hands, worn and calloused, came to rest on Lily's blanketed knees. She closed her eyes and began to hum, a low, melodic sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath them. It was no song Charles recognized. It sounded older than anything he knew, like the voice of the forest itself. Lily flinched. Charles immediately tensed. "What's happening?" he demanded. I felt something," Lily whispered, her voice shaking. "In my toes." Charles knelt beside her, disbelief flooding his chest. "Are you sure?" Lily nodded, her lip trembling. The old woman opened her eyes, her gaze meeting Charles's without fear. "Her spine is not broken," she said calmly. "It's frozen, locked by fear, by grief. You've treated her body, but you forgot her heart." Charles shook his head. "That's not science," he said roughly. "No," the woman agreed, smiling gently. "It's something older than science." Mason stepped closer now, his hands deep in his jacket pockets. "Can she try standing?" he asked. The old woman turned to Lily. "Only if you want to, sweetheart." Lily stared at her legs like she was seeing them for the first time. Then slowly, she gave a shaky nod. The woman eased the wheelchair back a few inches and offered Lily her hands. Charles's heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. The birds, the trees, even Mason's quiet breathing. Lily gritted her teeth, pushing with her arms. Her right foot twitched, slid forward an inch, then her left. Her knees buckled, and Charles lunged forward, but the woman held up a hand, steady and sure. "Let her try," she said softly. With a whimper, Lily pushed again and stood, wobbly, trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks, but standing. "Daddy," she gasped, her voice breaking. "I'm standing." Charles fell to his knees, arms open, tears flooding his vision. He didn't care if it made sense. He didn't care if it was impossible. He only knew that, for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't holding his daughter up. She was holding herself. And against all reason, all logic, Charles believed. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Lily stood on shaking legs, clutching Charles's arms for balance, tears streaking down her pink cheeks. Charles could barely breathe. It felt like the entire world had tilted, everything he thought he knew about reality slipping through his fingers like sand. When Lily finally sat back into the wheelchair, exhausted but smiling, Charles turned sharply to Mason. He needed answers. He needed to know what had just happened. And how. "Who are you?" Charles demanded, his voice thick with emotion. Mason shifted on his bare feet, suddenly looking much smaller than he had before. He glanced at the old woman, who simply nodded once, giving him permission to speak. "I'm just someone who remembers," Mason said quietly, his hands buried deep in his oversized jacket. "Remembers what?" Charles pressed, his heart pounding. Mason looked down at the ground, scuffing the dirt with his heel. "When I was little, 5 years, old maybe, I was born with a twisted ankle. Kids at the shelter used to call me names. I couldn't run, couldn't even walk right. My mom, she left when I was 4. Grandma Harper was the only one I had." He paused, swallowing hard. His voice trembled, but he forced himself to keep going. "One day, after another kid pushed me down, Grandma said it was time. She didn't take me to a doctor. She didn't give me pills. She just held my foot, closed her eyes, and sang the way she did just now. I felt something move inside me, like my body had been waiting for someone to believe in it again." Charles listened, stunned. Mason's words weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed. They were raw. Honest. "I stood up that day," Mason said. "Walked straight across the room without falling." He looked up, his dark eyes fierce. "They called Grandma a liar, said she was a fraud, said I was making it all up to get attention. After she died last year, they wanted to put me into the system. I ran. I couldn't just sit somewhere safe when there were people like Lily out here, people nobody believed in anymore." Charles felt something crack inside him, something deep and old. Maybe anger, maybe regret. So you just wander the streets? Charles asked hoarsely. Looking for people to save? Mason shrugged. Not everyone. Only the ones who still believe. Or the ones who forgot how, but really want to remember. The old woman, Grandma Harper, stepped closer, her green eyes calm. Medicine has its place, she said softly. But sometimes healing isn't about chemicals or machines. Sometimes it's about being seen, being heard, being loved enough to try again. Charles knelt in front of Mason, looking him in the eye. You saved her, he said simply. You gave her back her life. Mason shook his head. She saved herself. I just reminded her she could. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the little clearing. Lily tilted her head back and laughed, a light, joyful sound Charles hadn't heard in years. At that moment, Charles realized something profound. Healing wasn't always about fixing broken parts. Sometimes it was about mending broken hope. A week later, the auditorium at Lily's elementary school buzzed with excitement. Parents lined the wooden benches, teachers shuffled papers nervously, and a row of students sat waiting for their turn to cross the small stage and receive their awards. But today, everyone's eyes were on Lily Bennett. Charles stood backstage, his heart hammering against his ribs. He watched as his daughter, dressed in a soft blue dress and silver sneakers, rose carefully from her chair. No braces, no crutches. Only her determination and the memory of that day deep in the woods. The room fell silent. Lily took a shaky step forward, then another, and another. Her steps were small, cautious, but they were hers alone. The audience gasped collectively, some parents covering their mouths, teachers blinking back tears. Cameras flashed as Lily made it across the stage, slow, unsteady, but standing tall. When the principal handed her the award for courage and perseverance, Lily didn't talk about hospitals or doctors. She didn't mention therapy or surgeries. She just smiled at the crowd, held the microphone with both hands, and said, "A boy reminded me that I wasn't broken. I just needed to remember how to believe." Charles wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring who saw. Later that afternoon, after the applause had faded and the banners were taken down, Charles sat in his car, staring at the wrinkled business card Mason had accepted that day. It was still in his wallet, creased and worn. He wondered if Mason would ever use it. Part of him prayed he would. Part of him knew he probably never would, because Mason had never been looking for rescue. He had been the rescuer all along. Across town, deep in a different part of the city where the sidewalks were cracked and the streetlights flickered, Mason sat cross-legged in an alley behind a battered convenience store. Beside him, a little girl with tangled brown hair stared blankly at the ground, her hands trembling. She hadn't spoken a word in days. Mason didn't ask what had happened. He didn't press her with questions or promises. He just hummed softly, the same old melody that carried through the trees that day, the same tune Grandma Harper had once sung. Slowly, the girl's hand crept across the concrete and found his. Mason smiled gently, but didn't speak. Healing didn't always begin with medicine. Sometimes it began with someone who refused to walk away. And somewhere, miles away, Lily leaned on her father's arm as they strolled through a sunlit park. She stumbled once, laughed, and caught herself before falling. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real, and it was enough. Because now, Lily knew what Mason had known all along. Believing could build miracles. And sometimes, the greatest healers were the ones the world never noticed. Quiet souls who saw broken wings and waited patiently until they flew again. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and share how this story made you feel. Have you ever experienced a moment where a simple act of kindness or belief changed your life? We believe that healing doesn't always come from medicine. It often comes from hope, from someone who chooses not to walk away. Let's build a space where stories like Lily's and Mason's can live on, a place where belief is stronger than doubt. Your comments mean more than you know. They help us see how far these messages travel and remind us why stories like these matter. So if you believe in second chances, in miracles hidden in plain sight, or simply in the power of kindness, tell us your thoughts below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow we'll be sharing another story that might just change the way you see the world. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your voice matters here.